The moment I pushed open his door and saw him cradling that camera, his eyes fixed on the images of me wrapped in silk, illuminated in crimson, I knew a line had been erased, leaving a permanent mark on our shared story. My name is Aleena. At 44, I was a parent who believed she knew every border, every limit, until that evening redrew the map of my heart. Can you recall a time you stood at a cliff's edge, only to realize you'd already stepped into the void? Share your story below. This isn't just my tale. It's about the quiet, startling moment when the life you've drawn so carefully begins to bleed outside its own lines. That dawn, our little Pacific Northwest town was buried under a deep, fresh silence after a night of relentless snow. Pressed against the chilled glass, I cradled my steaming mug, watching the January sun cast a weak, blue light over the deserted lanes. The world outside seemed suspended, so hushed it felt like silence itself had a sound. But within me, a quiet tempest was gathering. Days like this always turned my thoughts to James, the man who pledged a lifetime but departed early, leaving Leo and me to assemble a new existence from the fragments. When James walked away, Leo was just a toddler, a little boy who learned the shape of absence before he learned to spell his name. I did too. The solo years were a long climb, but we made it, step by step. Yet, within the deepest, quietest chambers of my spirit, a single stubborn ember still glowed. My fingers tightened around the ceramic, as if I could absorb its fleeting heat. The dreams I'd once nurtured of leaving, of a sun-drenched future, now felt buried under the same heavy, soundless white that coated the rooftops. The thud of confident footsteps on the stairs pulled me back. I turned to see Leo in the kitchen archway, a bulky knit sweater swallowing his slender frame, his trusted camera a familiar weight on his shoulder, his smile unchanged and warm. "Morning, Aleena," he said, leaning in to brush a kiss against my temple. The simple contact was an anchor. I smiled softly. "Off on an adventure so early?" He shrugged, a spark in his gaze. "Heading to the bluffs. The snow's perfect. The light will be just right." A familiar pride swelled in my chest. Even as a child, he had a gift for finding wonder in overlooked corners. Leo's photographs didn't just freeze time, they whispered secrets. An impulse, sudden and surprising, fluttered in my mind. "Want some company?" I asked, masking the eagerness in my voice. His face lit up like I'd offered a treasure. "Seriously? You'd come?" I nodded, tilting my head. It's been years since I've seen the cliffs in winter. We bundled up and stepped into the crystalline air. The cold stole my breath for a second, but seeing Leo's bright anticipation, I felt a warmth kindle with every step. On the path, our boots sank in unison into the pristine powder, our synchronized strides a silent testament to a bond one knew James had forfeited long ago. The frail winter sun wrapped around us, and it struck me. Perhaps my next chapter didn't need to begin with a grand romance. Maybe it just needed this. Just him. The wind sang a low tune through the skeletal firs. Our exhales became ghosts of vapor, swirling briefly before vanishing. The overlook emerged, the sea below churning against a coast laced with ice. The trees were sculptures of frost, glittering dully in the morning haze. Leo found his composition swiftly, his focus absolute, as if consuming the vista through his lens. I stood beside him, watching not the landscape, but my son, the steadfast companion of my solitary journey. The sight of him, so intent and passionate, stirred something deep within. For a fleeting second, James's face surfaced, not the distant man he became, but the youthful partner who once held me close on a similar frosty morning. "Aleena." His gentle voice brought me back. I started, then offered a placating smile. "Sorry. Miles away." Leo studied me, his eyes tender yet perceptive. "Thinking about Dad?" The question, soft as a snowflake, landed on a vulnerable patch of my heart. I nodded slowly. "Sometimes. Not who he is now, but the potential. The other path we didn't take." Leo was quiet, then moved closer, wrapping me in an embrace. In the biting cold, his hold was a furnace of comfort that threatened to melt my composure. "Aleena," he murmured, his voice steady. "If I had to choose it all again, I'd still choose this. Just us." It was a simple declaration, freighted with a meaning words could never fully carry. I held him tightly, feeling the boy I'd raised now solid and sure in my arms. Time rushed past my awareness. He was a man now, who loved and protected in his own fierce way. We stood like that in the white-drowned stillness, the world pared down to just us two. When we parted, Leo said softly, "You've always been my favorite subject to learn from." I laughed, patting his arm. "You're just being kind." He shook his head, his smile light, but his tone grave. "No, You taught me to find the extraordinary in the ordinary. I fell silent, a profound wave of emotion cresting within me. I had raised a person of depth who understood feeling. The wan sunlight caught Leo's profile, etching his newfound maturity in sharp relief. Suddenly, he raised his camera, pointing it at me. "Let me capture you," he said, a playful grin forming. "You're the best part of this scene." I meant to protest, but the pride and affection in his look disarmed me. I gave a slight nod. The shutter clicked, a tiny sound holding an immense, quiet truth. A testament. We left as the sun climbed, its light fracturing on the icy branches like scattered diamonds. On the walk home, Leo kept glancing at his camera's display, shooting me smiles that sparkled with pure joy. Back inside, the kitchen's familiar warmth quickly thawed our chilled skin. I hung my coat, peeling off gloves still dusted with melting flakes. Leo followed, his camera still in hand. "Sit," he said, a note of secrecy in his voice. "I want to show you something." Curious, I settled at the table. He connected the camera to our aging laptop, flicking past stunning landscapes of cliffs and frozen lacework until one image filled the screen. It was me, framed against the endless white, my simple charcoal sweater a stark contrast. My cheeks were flushed from the wind, my eyes looking somewhere far off, a ghost of a smile on my lips. In this frame, I wasn't a woman weathered by years and worry. I looked alive, luminous. I stared, speechless. "See," Leo whispered, pointing at the screen. "Not just beautiful. You're radiant." I swallowed against a sudden tightness in my throat. "Leo," I began, but had no words to follow. He turned to me, his gaze more serious than I'd ever seen. "You always see yourself as the stage, the setting. But to me, you've always been the main event. The source of light." I looked away, afraid he'd see the tears pooling. But he was patient. "You know," he continued, his voice barely audible, "how many photos I've taken of empty places, always imagining you in them? The quiet docks, the foggy trails, the vacant benches. It's because I feel your absence in all that solitude." I could stay quiet no longer. I turned back and took his hand. "You've grown up," I said softly. "You don't have to carry my solitude anymore." He shook his head, squeezing my hand. "I want you to know you don't have to carry it alone. I'm here. Always." In our humble kitchen, before the glowing screen of winter scenes, we sat hand in hand. The snow outside might have been sealing the world shut, but here, in this small space, there was only a pure, piercing warmth. A strange sensation uncurled inside me, like a door long rusted shut, had begun to groan open. The way Leo looked at me had shifted. In his eyes, I saw a profound empathy and a fierce desire to solace my loneliness, something I hadn't dared to name but could unmistakably feel. Something within was irrevocably changing. That evening, after a simple dinner filled with easy laughter, I tidied up while Leo vanished upstairs with his camera. The house settled into its familiar quiet, just the murmur of wind at the panes. As I was drying a plate, I heard his returning footsteps. He appeared holding a small velvet box tied with a silver cord. "For you," he said, his eyes bright with anticipation. I dried my hands and approached. "What's this?" I asked, an inexplicable nervousness fluttering in my chest. "Just a small thing," he replied. "I've had it for a bit, but today felt right." I carefully undid the cord. Inside, on a bed of velvet, lay a delicate platinum necklace with a single, fiery opal pendant. Simple yet breathtaking. I looked up at him, my vision blurring. "Leo, you shouldn't have." "It's not about should," he said gently. "I want you to remember you are worthy of being seen. And cherished." My fingers closed around the box. How long had it been since I'd received a gift that was purely a celebration of me? "Let me put it on for you," he murmured. I nodded, my heart drumming as I turned. His fingers brushed the nape of my neck, and the touch sent a current through me. The metal was cool, but his hands were warm. "Wear it," he breathed near my ear. "And remember, through my lens, you're always this captivating." I closed my eyes, letting the words soak in. A strange, unidentifiable feeling seeped into my heart. When I turned to face him, we were close. Too close. I could feel the warmth of his breath on my cheek. Leo's eyes held mine, no longer a son's gaze, but something deeper, more intimate, more weighted. I instinctively stepped back, seeking air, trying to quell the sudden inner riot. "You know," Leo said with a soft chuckle, though his smile seemed strained, "I think I just took the best portrait of my life." I managed a weak smile, masking the turmoil. "As long as you're happy," I said quietly. He nodded, but that look, the one that seemed to hold my heart in its grasp, lingered long after he turned and retreated upstairs. I stood alone in the kitchen, one hand clasping the pendant at my throat. For the first time in so many years, I understood. The door was open, and Leo had been the one to turn the handle. That night, the snow began again in earnest. Large, languid flakes spiraled down from the black sky, blanketing the world anew. I sat alone in the living room, firelight painting orange shapes on the walls. The tea in my hand had gone cold. My mind was trapped in the earlier moments. The cool stone against my skin, Leo's gaze, the touch that felt accidental yet seismic. A soft knock. I glanced up to see Leo in the doorway, holding 2 mugs of steaming cocoa. "Thought you might like this," he said, his look a blend of shyness and tenderness. I smiled gratefully. "Thank you. I do." He entered, handed me a mug, and sank into the armchair opposite. The fire danced between us, casting his face in shifting light, making him seem both young and ancient. We drank in silence, listening to the hypnotic whisper of snow against the glass. "Aleena," he said after a long while, his voice as soft as the falling snow. I met his gaze. Direct. Honest. Full of unspoken words. "I probably shouldn't say this," he continued, his voice dropping. "But sometimes I wonder, if we weren't parent and child, would things be different?" My heart clenched. A vast silence stretched before I found my voice. "Leo," I whispered, unsure whether to refute, comfort, or confess that I, too, had skirted that forbidden thought. He set his mug down, rose, and in 2 strides was before me. I felt the heat of him, felt the room's temperature shift. "I'm sorry if this makes you uneasy," he breathed, leaning closer, his eyes tracing my features as if committing them to memory. "But I can't keep pretending." His hand found mine, his fingers stroking my knuckles. A gesture so tender and so potent it stole my breath. I should have pulled away. I should have doused the sudden, dangerous flame. But I remained still, drawn into that look of admiration, loneliness, and an emotion too vast to be simple love. Outside, the snow fell. Inside, the space between us dissolved like the boundary between earth and sky. I heard my own heart thunder as Leo leaned in, bridging a gap so fragile a sigh could shatter it. And in that moment I whispered, with all my fear and all my buried yearning, "Leo, don't." But my hand still held his. My eyes never left his. The room froze on the tail of my feeble protest. I had said don't, yet my body, my gaze, my grip betrayed me. He stood there, breath trembling, his deep green eyes searching mine for a permission we both knew was forbidden. I slowly withdrew my hand, my skin still humming. "Leo, we can't," I said, trying for calm but landing on plea. He didn't speak. Instead, he knelt before me, so close I could see the firelight reflected in his pupils. "Aleena," he whispered, and the word held more than familial respect. It was thick with a craving to be known, to be touched, to be loved not as a child, but as a man achingly aware of our tangled hearts. I closed my eyes. I needed to end this. I had to. But when I opened them, his face was there, and any denial felt like a lie. His cheek pressed gently into my palm, seeking solace, seeking acknowledgement. And then I heard myself whisper, "We're both too lonely to be strong." I don't know why I said it. Perhaps because the solitude had piled up like the snow outside. Perhaps because I'd been invisible for so long. Or perhaps because I, too, desperately wanted to feel alive, if only for this reckless moment. Leo looked up, his eyes spilling over with unrestrained emotion. When his lips brushed my palm, I shuddered. But I didn't pull away. Slowly, tentatively, he leaned forward and pressed a kiss to my cheek. It was soft, almost chaste, yet it carried the weight of 1,000 confessions. It was not a child's kiss. It was something else entirely. I closed my eyes, feeling his thumb gently wipe a tear I hadn't felt escape. My heart raced, but my body defied all reason. I didn't retreat. And when he gently laced his fingers with mine, offering comfort and a promise, I knew we had stepped into a labyrinth with no clear exit. We could not easily return from that kiss. It should have terrified me, should have sent me pushing him away. Instead, I felt only a devastating warmth, a bittersweet ache so intense I wept silently inside. Leo recoiled instantly, horror dawning on his face. "Aleena, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have." I gently placed my fingers on his lips, stopping the apology. I shook my head, tears glistening in the firelight. "It's not your fault," I whispered. "We're both lost." We sat in a silence as heavy and suffocating as the snow outside, a silence that spoke volumes of the taboo, the longing, and the despair of knowing some lines, once crossed, erased the path back to what was pure. After that night, everything shifted. We didn't need to name it. The change lived in our glances, in every charged silence. What grew was an intense, complicated tether, a fragile, binding cord between two solitary souls. The next morning, I woke feeling trapped. The cold dawn light cut through the curtains. I burrowed under the covers, wondering how to mend the unmendable. A gentle knock. His knock. I pulled the quilt higher. "Come in." The door opened and Leo entered. His hair was sleep-tousled, his eyes shadowed with a lingering sorrow. "Morning," he said softly, hesitantly. I sat up, nodding. "Good morning." The air between us was viscous. He moved slowly, as if testing the stability of the ground. "Are you all right?" he asked, his eyes searching for a sign, any sign. I opened my mouth to declare it all a mistake, to demand we stop. But when his gaze drifted to the open collar of my robe, the words died. He took another step and sat on the edge of the bed. So close I could feel his body's warmth, hear the slight tremor in his breath. "Aleena, last night," he began haltingly. "I've never seen you that way. So beautiful." I gripped the quilt, my heart a frantic bird in a cage. "Leo, we can't." But my protest was a whisper lost as he took my hand and brought it to his lips. The kiss was light, trembling yet resolute. "You have no idea," he murmured, his eyes pleading, "how lonely it's been, watching you carry everything alone, watching you shoulder it all in silence. I just need you to know, you're not alone." I wanted to say I knew, that I felt his love every day. But I also knew, with crystalline clarity, that the nature of our feeling had slipped its moorings. Instead of speaking, I simply squeezed his hand. In that thick, silent moment, Leo leaned down and gently pressed his forehead to mine. The gesture was so tender, so devastatingly sincere, that my final internal wall crumbled to dust. I closed my eyes and surrendered to the tide. A warm hand brushed the hair from my temple. Another kiss, softer than the last, but more perilous because we now knew the delicate ground on which we stood. And this time I kissed him back. We didn't fall upon each other. It was a slow, hesitant, trembling convergence, like two exiles finding shelter in the same storm. It was a communion of understood loneliness, of acknowledged yearning, of wounds laid bare. When Leo whispered, "Please don't shut me out," I knew the point of return was far behind us. I didn't push him away. I couldn't. The winter night outside remained brutally cold. But in that small room, a different kind of storm had broken, one neither of us had the strength to weather. I woke at dawn in a haze. The room was washed in a thin gray light. Leo slept beside me, his breathing even. I carefully shifted, gazing at the face of the boy I'd guided through childhood's trials. He was a man now, and I, in all my frailty, had led us into an emotional wilderness with no map. A wave of vertigo hit me. I slid from the bed, wrapped myself in a robe, and went to the window. The snow had ceased. An endless, pure white stretched out, a stark counterpoint to the chaos within. Leo stirred, then sat up, the blanket falling away. He saw me at the window, looking both vulnerable and resolute. "Aleena," he called softly. I shut my eyes, fighting back tears. "We have to stop," I whispered, my voice cracking. "Last night, it can't happen again." He stood and approached. I felt him behind me, his breath on my neck. A hand came to rest on my shoulder. This time I turned, putting space between us. "I know," he said, his voice solemn. "But you also know we can't pretend it away." I tightened the robe around me, a feeble armor. "We must," I said, forcing a firmness I didn't feel. "You have a whole life ahead. You need to move forward, Leo. You need to forget." He looked at me for a long, agonizing moment. In his eyes I saw love, chaos, and pain. Then he nodded. A single, sharp nod that felt like a guillotine falling between our shared world. "Okay," he whispered. "If that's what you need." A silent, suspended heartbeat passed. I didn't answer. I turned back to the window because one more second of his gaze would have shattered my resolve. No more words were said as he walked from the room. The door closed with a soft, final click that echoed in the hollow of my chest. I stood there for an eternity, listening only to the mournful wind. This wound would never scar over. The greatest loss is not of a person, but of the piece of your own heart you gave away, which can never be retrieved. I knew from then on, only silence would live between Leo and me. A dense, living silence carrying all the unspoken words and untouched feelings. I sank into the chair by the window, resting my head on my arms, watching the bleak January sky. From here, I could see the solitary trail of his footprints in the snow, leading away until they faded and vanished around the distant bend, as if they had never been. I wondered if he'd looked back even once, if he felt the same rending absence in that moment of parting. We would likely never speak of it. Some things can only be held within, like a hidden fracture, invisible to the world but aching with every change in pressure. I knew I would go on. There would be ordinary days, quiet meals, silent Sunday mornings. But I also knew, from that moment forward, the winter within me would never truly thaw. Because some things, once lost, are gone forever. Some stories don't end with a period. Sometimes a single glance, a fleeting touch, rewrites everything. Have you ever faced a goodbye you were powerless to prevent? A feeling so warm it burns, yet so precious you lock it away in silence? Share your thoughts below.